I actually think this question is a little hard. It's kind of weird because we have to just make a little bit of an assumption at the end of the day, because I don't know how sound behaves. I'm not really told in this passage, and the answer choices go in completely different directions with this too. So we just gotta maybe feel it out and see what makes the most logical sense. It's less about the vocab and more about just basic common sense, I guess. So let's look at it here. Birds sing to communicate over potentially great distances. For this reason, many researchers believe that birds in densely vegetated habitats generally sing at lower frequencies than birds living in comparatively sparse habitats, since dense vegetation tends to blank the distance that high-frequency sounds can travel. So I think what I'm supposed to know here is that, like, lower frequencies versus higher frequencies. Like, I guess I'm supposed to think about this and be like, okay, the dense vegetation means a lower frequency because something bad happens to high frequencies, right? So it lowers the distance, and that's basically it. But I don't know. I feel like that's got to be the answer because it just does fit. But I can't really put to words why it makes so much sense to me. And I don't like that. I don't love that I'm kind of going by feeling for this. But we can look at the other choices. They don't really make sense here. Dense vegetation, I don't know why I can't say that word. Vegetation tends to exceed the distance. Well, vegetation is not something that has a distance, I guess. It's not exceeding the distance. It's not like I don't even know, like we've drawn a line around the forest and then the dense vegetation is getting beyond that line. I don't know what that means. Maybe it's a usage issue, but exceed wouldn't make sense here. It does feel though like, I don't know, maybe if you really stretched it or kind of thought about it, you might be able to say, oh, well, how would I know exceed and diminish? Those seem like just opposite words. How would I know one fits and the other doesn't? That seems like you need to know about sound waves. But no, I guess it also just makes sense to me that if you have dense vegetation, it's going to block things, right? The denser the leaves, the more likely it's going to lower the chance that something can travel through it. So that's kind of why I maybe am going with B. Encompass means something more like surround. And so that doesn't really make sense. It's not surrounding the distance. It's not including the distance. I don't even know what that would mean to surround a distance. It just doesn't make sense. Conceal, I don't know why. I think that might be what people pick if they get it wrong. Mostly because you're thinking, I think, very visually about like a forest with lots of dense, vines and leaves and everything. And so you're thinking, oh, it's hard to see things. But we're not concealing the birds. We're talking about a distance, right? How do you conceal a distance? That doesn't really make sense, especially because then what we're concealing it from, right? We're concealing it from the high frequency sounds. Sound can't see a distance, right? Sound doesn't have eyes. Distance doesn't play with sound in that same way. So again, it doesn't really make sense. So I don't know if that's good. Feel free to comment if you've got something more substantial for this explanation. Honestly, I think if I think about it too much, I start to talk myself out of the right answer. Where if I just kind of go with it, it feels like, yeah, it just makes sense to say diminish. Diminish means something is lowered, right? To lower or lessen. So if we have all this green leaves, then yeah, it's going to lessen the distance that these high frequency sounds can travel. And that's why, and this is where the logic piece comes in, they tend to sing at lower frequencies, right? So I don't know that outside of this passage, but I'm using the passage and kind of like maybe dumb summarizing a little bit to kind of like see if the word works, but it requires a lot of rearranging and stuff like that. I don't love doing that. So to me, this isn't necessarily a hard question, but it's just like a weird one. I don't love that I don't have that kind of like, immediate, just like point to a word and say, this is why this one is right. Usually we do get that with these vocab questions, but occasionally it is more about interpreting the story and trying to just think about it logically. So you get a lot of variety with the vocab. Obviously, if you know more vocab words, that's going to be less of a hindrance to you. But yeah, just be prepared to really think about some of these stories if you need to. And sometimes you will need to kind of go based on your instincts about a word. And maybe that's not the worst thing in the world.